Now we will introduce our next speaker. Darrah Short is an undergraduate senior at University of Wyoming studying social work with minors in honors and disability studies. Her project is entitled Guardianship, Shifting the Culture Towards Independence. So please welcome Darrah.
Okay, there should be some flyers going around. Let me know if you need more of them. Some people came in towards the end and I have lots more. They might be in black and white and not color, so I apologize for that. Welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Darrah, like Chelsea said, and my project today is going to talk about guardianship. So to give you a little bit of background about where I come from, I was lucky enough to work on a project with some social work professors and professors in the disability studies department at the university, focused on, it was a photo voice project, focused on independence for people with disabilities and what does that mean? What helps independence? What inhibits independence? And what can we do about it? So that's kind of where I come from. And I wanted to start us off with sort of like a framing quote, and it's assume that I can, so maybe I will. And I saw this for the first time in a video for World Down Syndrome Day, and it was really inspiring to me because it was so simple but so profound, similar to this shift in guardianship that I'm going to talk to you about. And I want to name that even though I have experience in this on this topic, I'm not an expert, right? I want to recognize and honor that everybody in here has an experience with disability or will have an experience with disability that's wildly different than mine. And I want to encourage an environment where we can think about things differently and use our experiences to inform positive change. So with that, what is guardianship, right? I don't know, before I began this project, I had no idea what guardianship was. I didn't know that it was something that existed. And I think the only frame of reference that I had was when I turned 18, I could start signing myself out of class, which my mom was super excited about. So guardianship is a legal way for someone to make decisions for something else. So you're substituting one person's decision-making autonomy for someone else's. And in Wyoming, for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities, guardianship rates are double the national average. So as you can see, 65% versus 28%, and that's full guardianship, also known as plenary guardianship, which means that every decision that someone makes has to be decided by someone else, right? It's complete autonomy removal. And so in Wyoming, that's about 10,000 people with neurodevelopmental disabilities. Yeah, I saw some faces going like this. Yeah, that's accurate. So, it's really important to note this thing about capacity. So capacity is interesting because it's not explicitly defined in the law. Why is it not explicitly defined in the law? You can't define it. Capacity is something that's inherent in being a human being, as you can see with this definition that I'm referencing. We're distinct in other mammals because of our capacity. Capacity is fluid, it's changing, and so that's really hard to define in black and white legal terms. And guardianship law attempts to define this, and in that definition is restricting human rights in the process. So for any of the legal people in the room, this is Wyoming Law 3-1-101. And so guardianship law is many pages, but these are the parts that focus on specifically people with disabilities and also restricting guardianship for lots of people, as you can tell. So guardianship law attempts to define and restrict capacity using incompetence. So obviously, as you can see with these bolded definitions here, it's a really expansive list of people who qualify as incompetent, right? Advanced age, physical disability, disease, using alcohol or controlled substances. Note that it says use and not abuse too. Mental illness, mental deficiency, or intellectual disability. And mental incompetence is also singled out in the law, which makes sense considering the statistics that we referenced earlier that guardianship affects people with neurodevelopmental disabilities the most. And I want you to really take a critical look at what these definitions mean. It wasn't that long ago that being gay or being a woman was a mental illness, and that was used against people. So anxiety, depression, those are also things that are labeled as a mental illness. How many people, there's a statistic out there that's 1 in 2 people will experience some kind of mental illness in their life. So guardianship law, while it might affect people with developmental disabilities more, it's also applicable to every single one of us in this room. So these definitions of capacity, nice try, the law, but it didn't work. and it's harmful. It's really harmful for people. So something that I also want to talk about is that I'm not trying to say that guardians are bad, right? Guardians are pursuing guardianship for their family members from a place of love and seeking safety and support for people, often for their adult children or other family members. And guardians put their hearts and souls into caring for other people. And I want to honor and recognize that and sort of frame that and saying that guardians shouldn't be alone. Guardians should not be the sole decision maker for someone, because that's a lot to put on someone. And guardianship forces families to be that sole person. And sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's more than one, right? But still, it's that small sort of singled out person that's responsible for a bunch of stuff under guardianship. So guardianship can affect anybody, as we saw with those definitions. And guardianship is also super easy to obtain. So there's a few ways that happens. So if you look at the law, you only need what's called a preponderance of the evidence in order to prove that someone is incapacitated enough to get a guardian, right? And so the preponderance of the evidence is a complex legal term, but it really just means more likely than not. So the way that this has been explained to me is if you have the two scales of justice, right? And a feather falls on one, that's enough to say that someone needs a guardian. And also, there's some stuff being done with the Wyoming Guardianship. Developmental Disabilities Task Force. So it's the Governor's Council for that. They did a law review and did about 300 cases that looked at guardianship cases in Wyoming, and only 2 out of the 300 cases had some sort of legal representation. That was either a lawyer or a guardian ad litem, and only 2 people had that. So a lot of the time when we think about due process with the law, these people aren't getting a hearing, and they're doing things called 0-minute hearings as well, where there's some self-serve guardianship papers that anybody can find. You fill those out and submit them, and then that's your hearing. Which doesn't sound like due process to me. I don't know if it does to you. So guardianship is way too easy to obtain. And it's really risky and time intensive and more expensive than the alternatives. In your hands, you have the alternatives that are suggested. I don't have enough time in 10 minutes to go over all of them with you, but I implore you to explore those on your own. And another thing is that guardianship in the way that it's currently written is really hard on guardians, right? They have to, after you get guardianship, they have to make medical, legal, employment, educational, and interpersonal decisions for someone. And that's a lot. And often guardians are also older than the person who is under guardianship. And so there's no sort of like transference of decision-making either. And it also upholds ownership of someone else. When someone is under guardianship, they do not own anything. They don't own their property. They don't have access to their own bank accounts. They often don't even have access to their own phones or clothes or things that they can, go out to the store and buy. It's all kinds of decisions that are limited and restricted. And especially in a country, in a state that really values independence and freedom, this just doesn't make sense. So guardianship is avoidable, which is the good news. Think of the last 10 decisions that you made today. These are decisions that maybe you didn't even think about before, like didn't even label as decisions that you made before coming here. So think about what time you woke up, what you chose to read with your coffee, or what you scrolled on Instagram, how you looked on Instagram, what kind of underwear you put on, what you ate for breakfast, what time you left your house, the route you took to get here, and what time you get to leave this presentation today. I've worked with people who do not get to make those decisions for themselves and have not been able to make those decisions for themselves since they were 18. That's what guardianship does. And it's really scary and it's avoidable, right? So guardianship falls under substituted decision-making, right? Where we think that people are in need of protection. We think that capacity can be denied by the legal system. We think that decision-making capacity can be assessed when it can't. And we think that capacity is fixed, it's cognitive, and decisions are made independently. But we know that none of that is true. We know that the way that capacity and decision-making works is a lot more nuanced and a lot more flexible. So I don't know how many decisions I make that are completely independent. I use people all the time to make decisions. And that's what supported decision-making is. It's just a formal legal way and it's the same way that everybody else makes them. So it says that people are right holders, that there is universal capacity, that decision-making capacity is assumed, is inherent to people, and that capacity is fluid and can be developed over time, and that capacity includes support instead of a substitute for decision-making. So my call to action for you all, family and friends of people who might be under guardianship, evaluate and weigh the options to decide what's best for you and your family members, right? We know that restricting decision-making rights actually leads to less good outcomes in terms of quality of life, in terms of achievement, right? So that back to that quote at the beginning, assume that I can, so maybe I will. If we start assuming that people can make their own decisions, they will start to make their own decisions, even if it's not the decisions that we would support. So weigh those decisions. Professionals in the room, whether you're a teacher, a social worker, a lawyer, a direct service provider, anybody that interacts with humans, hi, I'm talking to you. Make sure that you're understanding the options, right? Informed decision-making is super important because there's dozens of other alternatives to guardianship that get to the same root, which is supporting people in decisions without the risk that comes with full guardianship. And start challenging those practices, right? I'm a social worker by training, soon, hopefully, if I graduate with my degree. So it's hard. It's hard to challenge people who are in positions of power who have been doing this work for longer than you. It's hard to say, what if we try something different? But it doesn't have to be a big change overnight, right? My understanding of guardianship didn't change overnight, and I'm not expecting yours to either. But try something. Try a representative payee. Try, doing a FERPA waiver or a HIPAA waiver instead of going straight to full guardianship, right? There's little things that we can do to challenge the status quo from a micro level all the way to a macro policy level. And then everyone, again, assume that people can, so maybe they will. And also recognize that maybe that just because you're not in a category of incompetence, it does not mean that you will never be, and it does not mean that other people are not. So everybody has a responsibility to advocate for one another and to assure that we have decision-making at every step of the way in our lives. So to close, the risks to guardianship are not worth the rewards. There's so many other alternatives that exist, and we can explore them and normalize them. And it'll take some small shifts at the micro level to then hopefully say, you know what, this guardianship law, we don't really need that. We don't really use that anymore. You're defending democracy when you're supporting the autonomy, the dignity and worth, the freedom of people and people's voice. Thank you.